I was a print guy who came to television because I just thought it just looked like fun. And first wandered into a TV studio in Columbia, Missouri. My roommate there was doing I think he was actually doing the evening news, was later hired in Boston and a whole bunch of places around. And I produced his TV evening news, or produced something rather. And it seems to me I also wound up doing the Today Show insets at 7:25 and 8:25. And I don't remember, so maybe I didn't, but I seem to recall that I might have for a little bit. But anyway, I just thought the TV studios and the idea of broadcasting this out to this enormous number of people was just almost it was magical. Now, the station in Columbia, Missouri was owned by the University of Missouri and run by officials at the journalism school. It was Channel 8, KOMU, as in OMU. MU was Missouri University. I don't know what the O was. But anyway, and had been put on the station and put on the air in 1953. And they built a studio like an old radio studio. I've been in radio studios in New York City, but most notably in Rockefeller Center, the NBC studios there. And they had, radio studios had guys sitting over here, with a microphone, and they had usually an orchestra. And then they had this nice large audience who was sitting there watching all this. Well, when they built the early TV station buildings, at least Missouri did, they built a visitor's overlook so the visitors could sit there and watch, things go on the air. And that didn't last very long at all, because you had to move sets around and kind of different. And soon enough, there were sets sitting in front of the overlook windows, and soon enough they were using the overlook to store stuff. And that was pretty much the end of inviting the public to come in and watch what was going on, unless they were doing some sort of clownish afternoon game show, which, by the way, my roommate was also stuck with doing. Well, anyway, that was fun, and I was soon enough hired for a few months to fill in over at the NBC station in St. Louis, KSD TV. And there I was actually being nicely compensated, a member of the union and all, all that. And this was 1966, and the studio in St. Louis had just been rebuilt for color, and the station itself, KSD TV, which I think I've said several times, and KSD Radio, which went back, way back into the 1920s, and had been built in for color in the old press room for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. St. Louis Post-Dispatch the Pulitzers owned Channel 5. They put KSD on the air, AM 55, and back in, again, the 20s, the radio. And when they got a chance to put a TV station on the air, they pounced, and that station went on the air in the latter part of 1947, and was one of very few TV stations that were on the air until the FCC kind of unscrambled stuff in 1953 and began licensing again. So anyway, into all this, I wind up being hired as a news writer. Did a little bit of on-air stuff, but not much. Although you can see the star quality is still here, as if. And there was everything I sort of loved about it. I remember walking into the studios. I'd oftentimes go. My shift, sometimes I was doing the early morning radio, and that went on the air at 6 o'clock, and I'd be writing that at around 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And I would also do the TV stuff and so forth. We'll talk about how the station itself operated in just a sec. But it was, you'd walk in here and it would be all dark, but there'd be glowing lights, of all the transmitter stuff and so forth. And kind of a hum, and it's like it was there ready to go, ready to reach out deeply into Missouri and deeply into Illinois, St. Louis being on the Mississippi River confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri. It's just north of St. Louis. And to a kid in his early 20s, it was just magical. So soon enough, I'm working for these guys. Now the way this worked is it was being run by a great guy, and I was very fond of the manager there, a fellow by the name of Austin Bridgman. And his sidekick, number 2 guy there, was a fellow by the name of Keezyweather. I wish I could remember Mr. Keezyweather's first name, but I frankly don't. These guys were veterans of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. They knew news. They were very good at it. They were struggling with very much the constraints of trying to do a news story on this new medium. It was still new at that time, and the constraint was that you had to. I was told that every story had to be 45 seconds unless the Soviet Union attacked East St. Louis, at which time we'd go a minute 15. And every story had to have essentially a headline, and then you would repeat that headline. So you're 15 seconds or so into your 45 seconds before you really have said anything. And it would roughly go like this. An airplane crashed in Paris yesterday. Now, the way the mind works and the way the viewer mind works is that if they're interested in airline crashes, if they're interested in Paris, if they're interested in yesterday, then they're listening. And if not, you've lost them and you're not going to get them back. But for the people who went, wait a minute, something about Paris? Wait a minute, airplane crash? So the second sentence of your news story said, the airplane that crashed in Paris yesterday killed 119 people. Okay, and now you've got them. And was on its final approach at Orly Airport or something like that. Give them some more information. And then you'd give them more and more, but 45 seconds is over, you're done too. And that's not a whole lot of words when you're doing a story. Anyway, that's the basic constraint of radio, basic constraint of TV. Unless you're doing long forms, like today we have podcasts that go on for an hour or so, and you can explore these things. Or like the early MacNeil-Lehrer report, which became the PBS NewsHour, where they would deal in those days, very very early on, MacNeil and Lehrer would deal with one story for an hour. Now later on they started to do 2, 3, 4 stories. Now get the back end of the constraints thing again. So anyway, you would, there was a wonderful cast of interesting characters at the TV station. Your film crews and talent and kind of people I bumped into in my news reporting days. I'd been a reporter all through college out in Virginia, College of William and Mary in Virginia, and Williamsburg, Virginia. I'd worked for the Richmond Times-Dispatch for roughly 3.5 years as a student, and also for the local newspaper in Williamsburg, the Virginia Gazette, which is really was then and is still today a very good newspaper. So I was a you could say I'm fairly seasoned, although quite young, reporter. Now I come to reporting on the news station. So how this worked was when you come in at 6 o'clock or whenever, I filled in, I did all the newscasts except for the primary 6 to 6:30 TV. And when you come in, you took over the newsroom. Okay, so here's this young, early 20s kid running the newsstand. Everybody who's there and have just finished putting the last newscasts on, now working for you. And you do the next several newscasts. Usually, if you're coming in at 6, you're doing 6 a.m., 6:30, 7:25 insets for today, and so forth. And then your shift is over probably in about 2 hours. I don't remember. And the next guy comes in and you show him or her, no, it's all him, all guys. You show who's coming in, what you just put on the air. Here are the newscasts. Here's what we're following. Here's a story which is sometimes the story is developing, and you step back and you wait to be told what to pursue. And the new guy who's come in just now is running the news for the next couple of hours, and then another guy comes in and he runs it for another couple hours. And by that time, I think it was only working 6 hours, 6.5 hour days here. We were not overworked in TV because, one, we didn't have long shifts. We were union. And then second of all, how much do you need to know if you're only going to do 45 seconds, on an issue? And I can tell you, it ain't much. So, in retrospect, until the Mary Tyler Moore Show came on the air, which was about the fictional WMJ in somewhere in I think it was in Minneapolis, because later on I was dating an heiress and visiting her, and spending time in Minneapolis. And she took me downtown to the spot where Mary Tyler Moore, in the first of the Mary Tyler Moore Show, takes her tam o' shanter or whatever it is and throws it in the air. And it's a very famous point. So anyway, Mary Tyler Moore Show was just quite reflective of Channel 5. You had the guy running the place, which was the Lou Ed Asner character, who was a responsible news guy who'd come over from print. And he was dealing with the Ted Baxter character, who was kind of just a mental oaf, likable, good-looking, so forth. And we had that guy. But we also had a fellow by the name of Chris Condon, who was doing our primary newscast at 6 and 10. Yeah, we were in the Central Time Zone. If we'd been in the Eastern Time Zone, they would have been 7 and 11, I guess. I don't know. And Condon was just first rate. I'd go out in the studio and I just would stand off camera and I'd watch this guy. And this guy had an internal sense of timing. So if you say, Chris, you need to be out of here in 28 seconds, Chris would be out of there in 28 seconds. He just knew, and it was fascinating to watch this guy. And he was very, very good, very nice fellow, and just very, very good. We're going to tell one Chris Condon story and then wrap it up. And this is, we would cut away from the network. When you're going into 10 o'clock news in those days, we had several cutaway points. We could cut away at 9:58:30. We could cut away at 9:59 itself, 9:59:30. But at 10 o'clock, our newscast actually began. Lights up, camera, off you go. So it really depended. If we had commercials, if we had 3 commercials, one to go 9:58:30 to 9, 9 to 9:30, 9:59:30, Then we would have 3 commercials. And on this particular night, the guys up in the control booth were quite comfortable, and we always cut away at 9:59, 9:58:30. We always had 3 commercials, but on this particular night, we only had 2. Okay, and these guys sitting here, you can kind of see what it's like at a news in a production control room. If you take a look at nearly film in network, where these guys are talking, they're not listening to the guy who's on the air, and the guy on the air says something or does something, and they say, well, did you hear that? No, I didn't hear that. I'm drinking my coffee and keeping an eye on the pretty girl behind me, whatever. Anyway, they cut away at 9:58:30, which means we're going to the news at 9:59. We're going to be 30 seconds of dead time, open time, and we'll just simply roll into the newscast, but we're going to be in there at 9:59:30, not 10 o'clock. Now this matters because we would go back up to the network at 10:02:30 or so, and we'd pick up a feed from the network for a story or two for maybe a minute and a half, and that we had to hit the spot. So now we're coming at 9:59:30, going back to network, let's say at 10:03, but we're shy 30 seconds of news there. So we cut away, and thank you, Chris Condon, and Condon starts, and Condon's got a sense of all this, and he's looking up, and the way it works, you go up, you start the evening news or something, blah, 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 and that few seconds as you start the newscast gives the talent, Mr. Condon, and your control room a chance to blabber back and forth a little bit. And Condon says, guys, you cut away 30 seconds too early. And I know we didn't. Yes, you did. You didn't. And I'm there. I was just a kid, and I just hung around everywhere. And I'm in the control booth, and see what's happened. And I'm on the move. Okay. And by the time they get it sorted out, I'm in the newsroom ripping off something off the AP, to take into to Condon to fill in, which he did do, but we just saw all kinds of stuff, and we're going to tell we're going to get into real stuff and stories pretty quickly here, but that's going to be it for this take.